The year is 1592. A Roman architect, once considered the most celebrated architect of his time, but who has fallen into disgrace in his later years, is commissioned to dig a canal near Naples. While digging, his workers come across fragments of wall paintings and ancient-looking coins, but no one is interested. The place where they are digging, fields and open space, has been known since the Middle Ages only as La Civita, the city. The architect's name is Domenico Fontana. He does not know it at this moment, and tragically, he will never know it, but he has just discovered the lost ancient city of Pompeii. And so, Fontana has the excavation pit for his canal filled in again, and it will take another 150 years before this discovery is made. Although Domenico Fontana, court architect to Pope Sixtus V, left many traces in 16th century Rome, he is best remembered for one achievement: the raising of the Vatican Obelisk. Let me start this video with a question. You know what an obelisk is, right? Or at least you could spot one. An obelisk is a tall, four-sided pillar made from a single piece of granite that tapers toward the top. The fact that you immediately have a picture in your head is amazing in itself. It means that obelisks, along with pyramids, are one of the most recognizable monuments of all time on Earth. And in a way, that is exactly how they fulfilled their purpose. You see, the function of obelisks in ancient Egypt was primarily to serve as cult symbols for deities, especially for the sun god Ra. But of course, from the very beginning, they were also symbols of power. Pharaohs had them erected to immortalize their names throughout the ages, and thus guarantee their continued existence in the afterlife. You can't really deny that they achieved this goal. One of the most famous obelisks, the Obelisk of Luxor, which now stands in Paris, is dedicated to Ramesses II, who still has a major influence on the image we have of pharaohs today. These mainly date from the Middle Kingdom period, roughly 2100 to 1800 BC, as well as from the subsequent New Kingdom period, which lasted until 1070 BC. Unfamiliar to our sensibilities, they were originally erected in pairs at the entrance to a temple. The individual obelisks that can be seen today in London and New York once stood together in Heliopolis. There is no question that obelisks were of great importance to the ancient Egyptians. They were transported at great expense by ship, from the quarries down the Nile to their destinations. So that's how they were transported. But the mysterious question is, how were they raised? And this is where the greatest architect of his time, the Roman Domenico Fontana, comes into play. But we're not there yet. There is a huge time gap of about 3,000 years before we get there. So what happened? Why did the obelisks end up in Rome in the first place? I mentioned the anecdote about Domenico Fontana stumbling upon Pompeii without knowing it, for a reason. The name Pompeii alone is a universal symbol of the transience of all earthly things. The story of the obelisks of Rome is quite similar in a way. It is about lost knowledge, the fall of empires, and the question of what will ultimately remain. March 15th, 44 BC. The Roman Senate convenes for a meeting, as it has done for 500 years. Rome is still formally a republic. The city on the Tiber is recovering from 4 years of devastating civil war. The turmoil has once again given rise to a dictator. Nothing new really, since the appointment of a dictator is a constitutional instrument of the Republic to deal with emergencies. But this dictator is different. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar, and it was not the Senate that appointed him dictator, but he himself, and not for a limited term of 6 months as provided for in the Constitution, but for life. For a group of Republican-minded senators, this is an intolerable situation. 23 times the daggers strike. They truly believe that they are saving the Republic and freeing Rome from monarchy. But now that Caesar lies dead on the floor, covered in blood, they realize that none of them has a clear plan for what to do next. And so it doesn't take long before the specter of civil war returns to the streets of Rome. On one side stands Caesar's heir, Octavian, his grandnephew and adopted son, and on the other, Mark Antony, Caesar's closest confidant. At first they form an alliance and divide the empire between them, but soon they are fighting for sole power. This struggle ultimately culminates in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Mark Antony, who ruled over the eastern part of the empire, had a glamorous ally at his side, the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. But as clever and charismatic as Cleopatra was, Egypt itself was only a shadow of its former power. The battle was lost. The lovers Mark Antony and Cleopatra met their famous end, and Octavian marched into the Egyptian capital, Alexandria. The once proud Egypt, with its more than 3,000-year-old civilization, was now under the rule of one man, Octavian, who later became Augustus, an honorary title that distinguished him as emperor and as divine. The Roman Republic had come to an end, and the imperial era had begun. But that was not the only turning point. For now a golden age was to begin, which went down in history as Pax Romana, Roman peace. And it was precisely during this period of relative stability that the one true peacemaker became flesh, whose peace would be based not on force, but on love. And his kingdom would last not only for centuries, but for all eternity. What Octavian, alias Augustus, now lacked was a visible sign of his victory over Egypt. So he had a truly gigantic obelisk, which had been waiting half-finished in the quarry of Aswan for centuries, completed and set up in the Forum Square of Alexandria, where it stood for 70 years. And in 37 AD, under the notorious Emperor Caligula, this obelisk was finally brought to Rome on ships, built specifically for this task. Its destination, was the circus that Caligula had built outside the city walls of Rome, now better known as Nero's circus. There, the obelisk stood in the central barrier that divided the elongated racetrack into 2 lanes for chariot races. But chariot races were not the only spectacle performed in the arena. In 64 AD, during the first wave of persecution, Christians were also executed here. Among them was a man who asked to be crucified upside down because he did not consider himself worthy of dying like his Lord and Master. This man was St. Peter. The Romans called the hill on which Nero's circus stood Mons Vaticanus, and just north of the circus was a burial ground where the Apostle Peter was laid to rest. 300 years later, when Emperor Constantine the Great laid the foundation for making Christianity the state religion, the first St. Peter's Basilica was built directly above this tomb. Throughout this time, the Vatican Obelisk remained in place, a stone witness in whose shadow these far-reaching events took place. The event that prompted Emperor Constantine to promote Christianity and build the first St. Peter's Basilica was a decisive battle that he won on October 28, 312, following a vision of a cross in the sky. The battle took place on a bridge just north of Rome that spanned the Tiber River. Its name, the Milvian Bridge. 1,200 years later, either in the winter of 1510 or 1511, a monk crossed this very bridge. He had crossed the Alps on foot and had come from Germany to Rome to settle matters concerning his order. Aware that he was now entering the city of St. Peter, Martin Luther threw himself to the ground at the first sight of Rome, exclaiming, "Hail, holy Rome, made holy by the holy martyrs and by the blood which has been spilt there." During his 4-week stay, the 27-year-old Luther did what all pilgrims to Rome do. He visited Rome's 7 pilgrimage churches. Among them, of course, was St. Peter's Basilica, built by Constantine. What he saw shocked him. And I'm not talking about the sale of indulgences or the moral decline of the clergy. All that, and how it ultimately led to the Reformation, is a story for another time. I'm talking about the surreal, chaotic, and frankly ugly construction site that Luther found himself in. The original basilica had been through a lot in its more than 1,000 years of existence. It was severely damaged several times, especially during the attack by Islamic invaders on Rome in 846, when many art treasures were looted. But it was repeatedly rebuilt, expanded, redesigned, and renovated. But now, old St. Peter's had finally become dilapidated. So Pope Julius II decided, just 5 years before Luther came to Rome, to erect a monumental new building, the largest church in Christendom. But when Luther visited, the old basilica had only been partially demolished, with unfinished sections of the new church protruding from the ruins. It was an eyesore that would take another 100 years to complete. And with it came a new problem. The Vatican Obelisk now stood in an unfavorable location south of the new St. Peter's Basilica. So, in 1586, Pope Sixtus V ordered the obelisk to be moved to the square in front of the main facade. Easier said than done. The ancient knowledge of how to transport and raise a gigantic obelisk had been lost. So the Pope announced a competition to solve the problem. And the winner was Domenico Fontana. Interestingly and remarkably, unlike many of the other obelisks in Rome, the Vatican Obelisk has never fallen over. Several devastating earthquakes and fires have failed to damage it. This meant that Fontana's task was as follows. First, to knock over the standing obelisk. Second, to transport the now lying obelisk a short distance to the newly created St. Peter's Square, and then the most difficult task, to raise it again. It is September 10th, 1586. People are crowding into St. Peter's Square. Wooden grandstands are being erected especially for the spectators. The obelisk has already been successfully laid down and transported on rollers. Now, the obelisk is to be ceremoniously re-erected. The stakes are incredibly high. Just imagine if something goes wrong, and the stone witness to Peter's martyrdom shatters on the ground and breaks into pieces. Fontana had a wooden tower erected in which the 25-meter-high obelisk, weighing 300 metric tons, was to be hoisted. Ropes from the maritime industry, some up to 220 meters long, as well as 40 winches, 900 men, and 150 horses were in position. It was eerily quiet. The Pope had forbidden talking, on pain of death, so as not to disturb Domenico Fontana's instructions. But when the ropes tighten and the obelisk slowly begins to rise, a sailor from Liguria can no longer bear it. He sees that the ropes are heating up and threatening to catch fire. He shouts, "Water on the ropes!" The venture was thus saved at the last minute, and the Vatican Obelisk has stood in the same place ever since. Once an ancient Egyptian cult symbol, until the culture of ancient Egypt declined. Then a symbol of the power of the Roman Empire, until the mighty Roman Empire also declined. According to legend, Caesar's ashes are said to be in the base of the obelisk. Just a legend, but a telling one. Today, a cross adorns the tip, called the Pyramidion, which contains a splinter of the true cross. And an inscription on the base makes it unmistakably clear. Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ conquers, Christ reigns, Christ commands. So what is the lesson to be learned from this? When even the most powerful empires fall and the most spectacular buildings collapse, is everything meaningless? No, that is nihilism, which contradicts Christianity. It is important to build and preserve, to create a world, as far as fallen humanity is capable of doing so, in which order reigns and not chaos. Power is not bad per se. It can be used for good. It is only the worship of power that is wrong and meaningless, seeking salvation in worldly things. I told you how a young Martin Luther visited the pilgrimage churches of Rome. If he had come to Rome just 100 years later, he would have been able to admire something amazing. You see, the Vatican Obelisk is not the only one in Rome. With 13 obelisks, Rome is the city with the most obelisks in the world. But many of these obelisks toppled over, along with other symbols of secular power, and were covered by the dust and dirt of centuries. There they lay in their grave, forgotten, until Christians gave them new meaning. They re-erected them and placed them in front of their churches, where they served as signposts for pilgrims. For example, in front of the Basilica of St. John Lateran and the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. As for Domenico Fontana, after the death of Sixtus V, he was accused, cliched as it may be, of misappropriating public funds, whereupon Clement VIII removed him from office. This was probably just in time, as Fontana was planning to convert the Colosseum into a large wool factory. Instead, he dug a canal outside Naples and discovered Pompeii in the process. But let's go back briefly to the Ligurian sailor, who risked his life to avert disaster during the erection of the Vatican Obelisk. As a reward, not only was he not executed, but he was also granted the honorary title of captain. And even more interestingly, his family was given the privilege of being the Pope's official supplier of palm branches. Palm branches that were, of course, needed for the Palm Sunday liturgy. And with that backstory, let me conclude this video with the following thought. In case you don't know, the palm branches used for the Palm Sunday liturgy are ritually burned the following year on Shrove Tuesday, and the resulting ashes are used on Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of the 40-day period of Lent, which ends with Easter. As an outward sign of penance, believers are marked with an ash cross on their foreheads on this day. It is a reminder that everything in this world is transient, people and empires alike, but that God has given us the hope of eternal life. During this ritual, the words from Genesis chapter 3, verse 19 are often spoken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And if you, like me, can marvel at the improbability that a 3,000-year-old Egyptian stone pillar became a signpost for Christians, how much more should we marvel at the improbability that a Roman instrument of torture became the ultimate symbol of hope. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. May you all have a blessed Lent.